I guess I want to explain what came on the motors and what we end up modifying to make it adapt to a more modern lower unit. This exhaust housing is the same as this one. This lower unit from here down is the factory lower unit, the way it came from the factory, and that is the left-hand lower unit that was on this motor here when we got it. Left-hand meaning the prop turns counterclockwise when it's in forward gear. These lower units have a very low water intake, which is right here in the nose. As you notice, the bottom of the boat is here, so the water is coming off the bottom of the boat, but it's picked up down here in the lower section. Those motors are so fragile because of these shafts in here. If you put them into gear, they immediately snap off right at the gear. And these shafts off of this gear case are still in this gear. There's 3 gears, there's actually another one. So that's what happens when you shift them while they're running. So we end up using 3 right-hand lower units to run the boat with the stock style lower unit. But we decided since they're so fragile, we would go to a more modern gear case like this with a bigger bullet area. The problem, 2 problems occur, of course, is the water line being here, the water would not go into the intake to cool the motor. But we were aware that as the water hits this, it would climb. But it won't climb quite far enough to all the holes. So what we do is we plug the top 5 holes, and then in this one here, you can barely see it, but there's only 3 holes left, and I got rid of all the bridging in between, so it has almost the same amount of water flow as this one does. And I scooped it up, and it scoops into there, and it's on both sides, of course. And it has enough water to cool the motors. To make sure it had enough water, we put water pressure gauges on the boat, which it never had, to check that there's water pressure at high speeds, at all speeds for that matter. And then that was the modification to make the stock lower unit work at that water height. Then there's quite a few other modifications or adapters that we needed to adapt to this exhaust housing. You know, because originally these would not bolt up to this exhaust housing. So there's this actually 3.5-inch spacer, which is made of 2 pieces of aluminum, one 2 inches thick, with a cutout here to allow the exhaust to come out, and then 1.5 inches thick, which allows to adapt the bolt pattern from the 6-bolt pattern way out here to a 7-bolt pattern inside. So you can't even see the inside bolts. There actually is 1 bolt right through here coming up, but that's the only one that's visible. Otherwise, they're all inside there. So to install these lower units on that, they have to be taken apart here. This piece has to be removed. This adapter plate has to be bolted onto that, and then all reassembled back to the original exhaust housing. I guess the difficulty in making that was there was no design out there to copy, which is the easiest thing to do is copy what somebody else has already done. But since there's nothing to copy, we did made a pattern out of wood to start with, to see if it's even close, and saw that it was going to work, took a lot of measurements, and came up with that 3.5-inch spacing. Turned out it was probably a little bit short. Should have been 3 and 7/8, you know, another 3/16 or something more. But that just created another little issue, which we were able to overcome. Partly was I had the drive shaft in this one made 3/16 inches shorter. I had to send it off to Florida to have it made because nobody in central Washington would touch it. And on this motor, I went ahead and added a 3/16 inch spacer on it. So I didn't have to because it is a factory drive shaft, standard, easy to come by, relatively easy to come by, what they call a long shaft. And then that motor there is another story. I was able to pick it up from New Jersey. Well, actually it was Maryland. And it bolted right on to my adapters without making any modifications. It happens to have a different water pickup as well. But those are hard to come by, and I don't know why the guy was willing to get rid of it, but he was. Oh, he had 3 of them. He didn't want a 4th one. So that's pretty much the story behind the adapters. And they work, after we get them all shimmed and work, they work quite well. We did have a local water jet company cut the basic shapes, and then we had to, they actually they call them punch the holes. Then they had to be made the right size. Had to machine them down on the inside to get a kind of a ledge for the nuts and stuff to fit in without going up into the exhaust chamber. The water tubes had to be shortened and made the right length. The shift shafts extensions had to be cut in the right and welded back together the right length. Had to lower these are called, you can see that's called a thrust block. So the thrust of the prop doesn't go onto the clamp bracket like it does in a standard boat. It thrusts up against these thrust blocks. Well, they were mounted lower because of this is lower. So I'm sorry, they were mounted higher, but these lower units, thrust area is lower. So I had to change the position of that by about 1.5 inches as well. It wasn't too big a task, but it had to be done. Other than that, everything from here on up is factory. Nothing's changed. Everything from there on down is, well, this is mine, and this is a factory modified lower gear case. There is one little thing as I put my hand there, I noticed, because they're all 3 right-hand lower units, they do pull pretty hard to the left. So normally, most boats have a trim tab here to adjust the steering torque. Well, since that's out of the water line's here, you can't adjust it. So the Skag then has I have a steering notch cut into it or ramp that pulls each lower unit that direction. And it's on all 3 of them. So that takes out the steering torque of the right-hand lower units mostly. It still pulls to the left anyway, but not as bad as it did without these on there.
Pulls to the right.
Huh?
Pulls to the right. It's easy to turn right.
Easy to turn right, pulls right.
Pulls right. Pulls right. My arm is right.
Yeah, okay, pulls right.